What was the scariest "we need to leave now" gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Years ago, before cell phones, I was driving home from dropping my husband at the train at 4:30 a.m. Only me and one other car on the road. He started turning where I turned twice, so I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. Turns out, he was following women home and driving past their house and doubling back to them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. Story 2. Years ago, when I was still living at home with the parents, I drove home around 2 a.m. As I parked my car, I noticed a man walking down the street. I decided to wait until he passed my car and was far enough for me to get out, however. Instead, he passed my car and hid behind the van that was directly parked behind me. I guess he did not think I was paying attention to him. So I called my dad, who was asleep, to come down and get me. He did. And when the guy saw my dad, he immediately ran away. I was lucky. Story 3. I had a month-old baby at home and didn't go out much. And one of my friends was in from out of town and asked if I wanted to see a band whose members were people I knew socially from college. I said, sure, that will be fun. I met her and a bunch of people at a bar across the street before the show and had a nice time, but got a feeling that I should go home. My husband was at home with our baby and wanted me to have fun, and I was, but I had a bad feeling to just leave. I said my goodbyes and left. There was a shooting at the bar that night. No one I knew was hurt, but they were locked in the bar for hours, and it was terrifying for them. I'm glad I trusted my instincts. Story 4. My ex had been planning to have me and make it look like a home invasion. His behavior had shifted in a very odd way the week before. I found out later he had a woman pregnant behind my back and had planned to move her in and ship my kids off to the state. Their dad is already dead. He wanted to collect my life insurance. I got up right after he left for work that early morning, got dressed in the first things I could grab, woke up my kids and told them we just had to go. I told them not to ask questions right then, that we just had to leave. The door that lead from our garage to the inside of our house was always religiously locked. That night, it had been left unlocked. In the weeks leading up to this, our security alarm had been bypassed, and he tried to blame my oldest son when my son didn't even know how to do that kind of thing. My husband taught someone else how to do it. Story 5. When I was a teenager, me and some friends were hanging out around midnight. A caravan drives past slowly with a few people looking out the windows. We all look at each other quiet, and the caravan pulls into a nearby parking space. We all get up and walk to our bikes because something feels really off. A few minutes later, we hear someone shout, and as I turned around, there was about 5 or 6 people getting out with metal pipes and other things in hands. We ran so fast, nothing happened, but I'm 99% sure we were about to get beaten and robbed. Story 6. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out at 50 to 70 m depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all got a very bad feeling like we were being watched. Ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see, then glide back in the other direction a minute later. The decompression stop to get out was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. Story 7. When I was around 9 or 10, my mom took me with her on a business trip to a nearby city. This is before smartphones, when you still had to MapQuest stuff. We were supposed to meet my mom's friend coworker at the mall for something. Since her friend had given her directions, we didn't bother going down to the hotel computer to print directions. I think there was maybe one there. This was around 2000s to 2001. We got lost and ended up pulling into a small storage unit place to pull out a map. It was just 2 rectangular buildings, maybe a total of like 20 units. I don't remember why exactly, but I was really scared and kept crying and asking if we could just go back to the hotel. I assumed she got fed up with her kid crying in the passenger seat and she couldn't quite figure out where we were, so we went back to the hotel. The next day, they found the bodies of 2 teenagers in one of the units we pulled in front of. Story 8. Sitting in my friend's backyard with their 2 kids, my husband, and another friend, enjoying pizza that my host made. It was a beautiful, clear day with no real wind. We're having a great time just out of the pool and hungry for pizza when I suddenly felt on edge. I looked straight at the kids about 8 and 10 or so years old and just said, "Get in the house." We all scrambled, and a second later we heard creaking. And maybe 5 seconds after it started, this big branch fell off of their pine tree onto the table where we were sitting. Thankfully, no one was hurt besides having to pick pine needles out of our pizza. I can only assume that I subconsciously heard the branch starting to give. Story 9. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. Friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy and his blonde girlfriend kept babbling at us about taking headshots and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5'8" and not a small girl at 13 years old. I was 4 feet 9 inches and around 65 lbs at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there, just a few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos. Story 10. I bartend, and years ago I kicked this guy out because he was acting very strange, muttering under his breath that he would my other customers, just really hostile. He had missing fingers on one hand, and he was kind of a bigger guy. After bar close, I was almost finished counting money, so like an hour after everyone left, and I was just about to leave, and I had that gut feeling. I looked out the window, and that guy was standing on the corner watching me in a ski mask. I know it was him because of the build. As soon as I grabbed my phone, he took off, but the cops know who he is. Now he has a vendetta out against me, and he's well known around town. Story 11. Wednesday midday, run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer in, I felt people watching me and directly turned around and ran home, even though I did not see anybody. Closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to my door and didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later, 2 guys were at my front door trying to push it in. I was luckily on the other side of the door at that moment and pushed it back closed with all my force and began screaming. I managed to security lock the front door and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went in. Looking back at the apartment's security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pull apart the magnetic security gates. 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanic lock that cannot be pulled apart. Story 12. Doesn't I need to go home now feeling count? And it wasn't me, but my mom. Anyway, I was around 12 or so, and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors we all kept to ourselves, and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door without being seen. I look out and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a shirt and jeans, and something just feels off. So I ignore him and wait for him to leave. But he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill. I'm alone, and now I'm getting scared. I go and hide and plan to wait for my mom, except she just left, had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me, as I'm trying to figure out what to do. My mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently, she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet, but turned around immediately. Found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently, he was acting very strangely and made my mom nervous. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted and no idea how my mom knew to come home, but I am very grateful she did. Story 13. My brother and I were kids playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3 and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever, so I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar, and neither were the men. They both got out of the car and approached my brother. They started asking him questions and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door, and screamed, "Someone is trying to kidnap Steve." My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. Story 14. I was 12 at the time, and my favorite thing in the world was spending the night at my grandma's house. We lived in the sticks at the time, and my grandma lived closer to the nearest town. Thursday night was grandma's night. I felt something off one Thursday night and asked my mom if I could just stay home with my mom and dad. They reluctantly agreed. I went home, watched some TV, and went to bed. My bedroom was on the adjoining wall to the living room. I wasn't really asleep, but I heard my mom keep saying my dad's name over and over again with a hint of panic. I sneak out to the living room, and my dad is on the couch with his head tilted back, snoring. really loud, which wasn't uncommon, but my mom was beside him shaking him and telling him to wake up. She yelled at me to go back to bed. I didn't, obviously. I snuck to their bedroom to call. I told the dispatcher that my dad was asleep and my mom was trying to wake him up, but she couldn't. Eventually, the phone call went to the living room and my mom talked to the dispatcher. They sent an ambulance to the middle of nowhere. My dad had taken a bottle of diazepam to try to commit suicide. I remember sitting on the floor and holding his hand and repeating over and over that I loved him. The ambulance came and took him to the hospital. Lights and sirens the whole way. We didn't know what happened during that time, but we found out a day or so later, and that is when our world changed. I am very sure if I did not call that night that my dad would have succeeded, and it would have probably have drove my mom over the edge as well. And I have no idea why I didn't want to stay the night at my nanny's. I just had that feeling that I needed to go home. Story 15. Me and my little sister went camping in the woods very close to our house when we were kids. We'd seen this bald guy with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which isn't unusual for the area. You'll often see people walking and say hello. For some reason though, I just got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both just gave each other this look. I don't know what it was that made me do it. This is very out of character for me, but I took a photo of the back of him as he was walking away. A while later, we see the same guy again near the lake. He comes over and asks about the tent we're carrying, where we'll be setting up, and are we camping with our dad? We say yes, we're just going to see him now. A lie. We must have had the same moment of psychicness because we walked off up a fork in the path until we were out of view, then looked at each other and jumped down a path hidden by the bushes and waited behind them on the parallel trail for a bit. The guy watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog until he couldn't see us, then turned around and ran up the path after us. Thankfully, he didn't see us hidden and carried on up straight where he thought we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea and went home. That evening, my mom shows us a post in the local residents group, which is a picture of the same bald guy trying to break into someone's house. Apparently, he'd just been walking around trying people's front doors and claimed to be a repair guy when he was stopped. I dread to think what his intentions were, but it was very lucky me and my sister knew those woods so well, otherwise we wouldn't have thought to go down one of the hidden paths. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.